This is the operation.
Yep, microphone. I guess I project pretty well in here anyway. Ooh, yes, let's put the phone right next to it too. Yeah. So this is the operations and management area meeting. It is also, curiously, the joint meeting with the Ops AWG, which is actually not meeting this time. So therefore, we have an agenda item that comes from them. I'm Joel Yegley. This is Benoit Clays. We're your friendly neighborhood area directors. There was sort of minor personnel change in the sense that I took over this working group prior to the previous meeting so that we could free up Benoit's resources to work on the project that comes later. Yes, I have the note well, which is, where is the note well? The note well is there. You should note it. The plan this time is to bash the agenda, look at some notable events, and then we have 3 presentations and a brief discussion of the pen practice and IANA registration document in the queue. This is estimated to take something like 45 minutes, so there is room for commentary, and we'll move on. Since the previous meeting, we've actually finished up 2 working groups, one on the operations side and one on the management side. EMAN has actually completed its work, so that is a cause for celebration. Some people thought that day would never come. WPK Ops is, I think, a little bit more, also an instructive lesson, because we took a risk on chartering that to do work in an area that the IETF is not traditionally strong in. And we found that over time we did not have the critical mass to pursue their key work items. And that's fine. That work is done other places. So in the CAB forum, for example. And so we elected to not continue that. The mailing list remains open, and there are participants who are remain interested in that space. I took one document under my wing to be AD sponsored. So I think we should congratulate ourselves for tying off loose ends rather than leaving them dangling. And I think that's it, and we can move on to the actual items. So I think Doug Goulash is going to be Douglas Gosh, sorry, is going to be the first presenter on TACX Plus. And
by the way, this is an Ops Edward UG item, but since we're combined most of the time, the Ops area and Ops UG, we're presenting this one. And we receive instruction that you have to stay in the pink square if you want your picture or on Meet Heiko.
Yeah, the camera is pointed at the pink square.
So as long as you stay in the pink square, this is like Bob Newhart, trying to find his location at the beginning of the show. Yeah, sorry. Inside baseball. Yeah, so move the microphone so that it works for you, please.
Okay.
Oops. Yep.
So, first of all, there's actually multiple people presenting, so I'm just delivering the first part of the presentation, and then I hand over the mic to Douglas, who will finish, and then all 3 of us can actually answer all the questions that people might have. Yes, so we are trying together with like 3 people in the square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you fall out of the square, you're out.
Right. So roughly what I'm going to talk about is what we want to do and why we want to do it, and then Douglas and Andre can talk about how we planning to do it. It's hopefully pretty straightforward. So I actually hope that we can spend the most time on like discussions and comments and not really with like slide presentation, PowerPoint karaoke stuff. Can I have the next slide, please? A little bit of background for people that are not that familiar with TACX Plus. It's actually was a quite old draft from '98 that was submitted to IETF, but it never made it to standard. It stayed a draft for whatever reasons. And we decided that we want to finish the job that people started back in '98 and finally just make it a standard. So that's one of the main motivations why I'm here today, and the other guys as well, of course. So one of the main things actually is that the two original authors from the draft from '98 are still listed as co-authors of the current draft. So all our work is basically based on what these people did back then. And we actually want to list them still as like co-authors as well. So it's like not that we claim to reinvent the wheel by ourselves from scratch. Another thing is...
before you move on, Scott Bradner, you listing the old authors as co-authors, do they know that?
Yes, we actually contacted them, we spoke with them, we asked them if they want to like be just mentioned somewhere in the text, if they want to be authors.
The reason I mention it is that it's in the publication process. They have to respond to email from the RFC editor, and if they don't know about it, that could be delay your publication kind of a long
yes.
time.
No, we are actually aware of it, they're aware of it, and that's like one of the reasons why we list them as co-authors, because it said, yes, would be a nice thing to do, please do it, and of course, we are happy to comply with that.
Yeah, surprised authors is a somewhat sensitive issue with us anyway. So yeah, we don't really want to sandbag somebody with a 17-year-old draft that they might have disowned in the interim.
It's also probably worth mentioning that this is actually a joint effort because Douglas actually works for Cisco, where the two original authors used to work back in '98 as well. And Andrew and myself work for Google. So this is like not a single person effort. And we actually had quite a very good collaboration between Cisco and Google on this. So what we actually try to do mainly is...
Let me be pedantic here. Scott Bradner again. The IETF is people, not organizations. I don't give a hoop rat's patootie who you work for. I care about what the technology is. So talking about good cooperation between Google and Cisco is irrelevant. Good cooperation between you and somebody else is very relevant.
Well, yes, that's actually what I meant. Like the three of us had a pretty good collaboration. We just accidentally work for different companies, but it has actually nothing to do with the motivation of what we're doing here. And also like the main focus for TagX these days for us actually is authentication on devices itself. So basically, if you're a network engineer, you want to connect your router, your switch, and then authenticate yourself. That was like what we're really looking for here. And I think if we can get our presentation back, I'm ready for the next slide.
Yep.
Motivation, why we do this? Well, as I said, it's actually a draft still, and we just really want to have it as a standard because it makes a lot of things much easier. We have like an accepted standard than just a very old draft document floating around in the internet. A lot of people still think actually it's Cisco proprietary protocol, which is not true. A lot of vendors actually have implemented TagX based on the draft, but it's like one of the reasons why we really want to do this, to have basically a broad adoption of TagX as a standard protocol. What we did was we cleaned up the old text from the old draft from '98. So we basically made certain sentences less ambitious. We clarified the language. For example, whenever there was ASCII mentioned in the text, we changed it to US ASCII to just make it very clear what we talk about, even if this is not something that was broken, but we just thought we can do a little cleanup before we do submit. And basically, we really want to focus on what TagX is used for today, not what some people potentially envision TagX to be used for back in the 90s, because we actually just try to document the reality here that's out there, and that's one of the reasons why we did this cleanup. There's one change compared to the old draft, and this has to do with the encryption part, and Douglas is going to mention it later on as well. We basically want to just introduce TLS in parallel to the MD5, because MD5, as you all know, it's probably not state of the art anymore.
Thanks, Thorsten. So next slide, please. Thanks, Thorsten, and kudos for kickstarting the process of getting the standardized, or the draft standardized. Honestly, we were going to get around to do it. I know it was 18 years ago, but it was definitely on the agenda. So as Thorsten mentioned, the primary focus is to make sure that the TACACS Plus protocol does achieve RFC status if possible. But while we're doing this, we do want to address issues that maybe really definitely do need to be addressed, and one of those is the encryption. So the TACACS Plus protocol does actually have a form of encryption that's based on MD5. It is the actual implementation that's used does have some design flaws, and it's fairly much regarded now pretty much as clear text. So we rejected the idea, or we decided not to go for the idea of actually beefing up in the protocol encryption itself, but rather to use the transport layer as the method for doing the encryption. Obviously, one thing that is important, there is a lot of use of TACACS out there. So, from the point of view of this standard at this time, we didn't want to invalidate that. So, from that perspective, that's why we went for the, it had to be backwards compatible. Next slide, please. So, the perennial question: how to add TLS to a legacy protocol without breaking its backwards compatibility. The two options that we looked at, firstly, obviously having a separate port, or the other one is to use Start TLS. There's been quite a history of different adoptions of this. The approach that we actually went for was for the Start TLS, so at least I should say the approach we went for in the first draft was Start TLS. There's a couple of aspects of the TACACS protocol which do lend itself more to this direction, or let's say they mitigate some of the issues that have come up with Start TLS. One thing with TACACS is the pairs, the client and the server, both have pretty full configuration of each other. So the
I'm letting you finish the slide.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So the devices that are being configured, they're actually configured specifically which service to use. But more importantly, the servers have the full list of all the clients. So from that perspective, we're not using Start TLS for service discovery or for the case of the optional security, but actually it's just a way of switching on or off TLS on the same port.
Scott Bradner, since this is the ops area and ops area working group, there's certainly an operational advantage to having a separate port, because then you can enforce it at the network layer. And having been bit really bad by a vendor protocol that's not using a separate port at Harvard, where it turned out that all of the communication was in clear text because the server refused the client's request for encryption, and yet nobody knew that. I would urge serious consideration of a separate port.
I think that certainly is of the cleanup and the various changes we made to the specification. One thing we've got most comments on is whether to use Start TLS or a separate port. In the first revision of the draft, we did use Start TLS. I think that on the next revision, we'll probably look to see if we can use the correct solution, and then maybe on the third one, we might have an even more correct solution. So the point is taken well, and I think that we will certainly evaluate that point.
David Black. Unlike Scott, wearing a transport directorate hat. I've got a bunch of scars from exactly this issue in the port use draft. And Scott, you didn't see half of the email that hit my inbox on this. Good. So Scott's giving the operational perspective. Allow me to add two more. The security perspective effectively defers to what you just described. To the extent that a single port and start TLS makes sense for your protocol, that's fine. And the transport perspective is one less port is one more port for other people, and that would be a good thing. So I'm basically getting up to tell you that there is no single correct solution. Whatever you think for your you think is the right thing for your protocol is probably going to be okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that too. I'll just let you two sort of have a fight then, and we'll go for whoever wins.
Well, yeah, I mean, Joel Yeagley with a non-AD hat on. I think there is an advantage that is conferred by being able to say, oh, by the way, I only accept TLS from you in your configuration. And then, so this has a slightly different, maybe problem space than does, say, client and servers that are not already having mutual configuration for each other. So that may confer a benefit, or it may be undesirable. But the nice part about a standards action is you don't actually have to go ask for the port doctor for a port. You just tell them you need one. So, yeah. Yeah.
So certainly this is, I think, something that we have in the list of open items. Next slide, please. So there are some features of the original specification that we are actually planning to deprecate. There's a flow for send pass, which is actually previously marked as deprecated in the spec, and it's very dangerous. So we're actually not even going to we're going to remove the text for that one. We're going to remove the normative parts of the legacy elements of ARAP, because as to the best of our knowledge, no one actually uses that for the device administration use case and send off. So those two will still keep the constants in the spec, but we'll move the description. And next slide, please. So the main open questions that we've had, and this is from the first round of comments from the draft version 0 that we've uploaded, are the start TLS, as we can see. There's one other issue to do with the authorization and accounting attributes. So the authorization and accounting attributes are really where the power of extensibility comes from in the TACACS protocol. The slight disadvantage of them is that there's one single namespace which is pretty much unregulated. This makes it pretty productive. It's pretty straightforward to add the attributes as needed. But there is the issue with conflicts for potential different meanings of the same attributes from different vendors. And so from this respect, it's an open question that we have, and it's not something that we actually covered in the first version, but it is certainly something that we intend to look at in the next version. So I think just sort of to finish off, so when it comes to device administration, specifying who can do what to which device in which circumstances, it's quite a key policy area for an organization. And to have two different protocols actually and policies based on those two different protocols, as in TACACS or Radius, because TACACS is seen as a proprietary protocol, Radius is not so universally actually implemented. If we could get it, I think, as a standard, then it may be more universally deployed, and I think that would make that might make the job for organizations as they implement their device administration policy simpler. So that's the reason, one of the main reasons that we're resurrecting the TACACS protocol and hoping to move it forward from RFC. That's it.
All right. My name is Alan DeCock. I've been known to do Radius from time to time.
Radius is excellent.
Things, perhaps.
For network access.
I mean, my 2 cents on this, we already have 2 AAA protocols.
Mm-hmm.
If this is an individual submission and an informational draft, great, knock yourself out. But the only reason that Radius doesn't do device authorization or command authorization is the vendors have refused to implement it or standardize it. And that would be rather less work than coming up with a new protocol. And with the extensions we've had to Radius with TLS transport, increased attribute size, increased attribute space, there's no technical reason why any of that could not be done in an existing protocol.
That's a fair point, and I think that when you look into the long term, I guess, for what we really want to, when you get into the long term for solving those issues, maybe that would be a direction to go. But I think that TACAC certainly is.
But we've had 18 years to do it. The vendors have refused to do it. I don't see why adding a new protocol would make it any better.
So,
but why have they refused to?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a vantage point here as an operator, and I think I saw the motivation of this as not bringing, say, a lot of work related to TACX Plus to the IETF, but more. There are people who use it today who have interoperability problems because of their vendors don't implement TACX Plus in precisely the same way.
Well, that happens with Radius always.
Oh, yeah. No, I completely agree. Yeah. It also diameter and so on, right? I mean, I think, so the motivation of this really is like to roll the clock back to 1998 kind of and say, well, the version of the protocol that was there, minus the stuff that turns out to be super evil, is just the one that actually exists out there. And I have a lot of trouble imagining like a lot more work than that coming out of this.
Sure, but the thing for me is, sorry, let me talk on the mic a bit. The thing for me is I'm not sure why standards action is required.
Yeah.
This is largely a vendor protocol, despite what's said here.
So I think that's a question that we can probably leave to the Ops AWG chairs at some later point, since I'm not going to speak for them, or have a hum or something like that. We could do that on the list. But your point is well taken.
We already have AAA protocols.
Yep.
Adding a third one is confusing to be polite.
So by 3. You don't mean TACX and Radius then?
No, diameter.
Oh, I see.
Diameter and radius.
Yeah, the other one that we don't use.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, but I think that...
I mean, there's also LDAP in there too, but like...
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
LDAP is not an authentication protocol. It's not an accounting.
Yeah, that's why I store my keys there.
No, it's operationally, it's completely different.
Yeah, I
the
know.
overlap between TACAX and Radius is 99%.
Yeah.
And the only reason it's not 100% is the vendors have not implemented command authorization in Radius for 18 years. Well, do it.
Scott Bradner, one of those aforementioned Ops Working Group chairs.
Sorry, if I can
just a second. I would completely agree if this were a new protocol. That there's no need to add a new protocol. This is not a new protocol. It's a buffing of an old turd. And it's a useful turd to buff in this case.
Okay, I'm Andrei Ota, the third co-author, or fifth, depending on how you count it. Scott, thank you for actually addressing and giving part of my answer back. Always feels good to have somebody else answer for you. I think one part is, I don't see this as a third protocol. I see this as a widely deployed current protocol, which has a lot of issues because it's never been formally standardized. This is something that we lacked since end of 90s. And comparing to other protocols, AAA protocols, I would find this very ungrateful. But in general, I would like to see a protocol which supports per command authorization as well, or if we spread this more broadly, per event to be authorized on a network element, and accounting to be stable and verifiable, that when we lose accounting messages, which are more often used as auditing these days than just plain accounting, that we are at least aware this happened, not just that possibly happened, but we cannot prove it or disprove it. So I'm looking at this protocol as a way to stabilize it and formalize it without actually introducing a third, fourth, fifth, or sixth protocol.
Lionel Moore, so chair of the REDX and DIME also. Today I was reviewing the standard process in IETF, and for instance, for this one, what would be the remit of the IETF regarding what should be modified or not modified in TACACS Plus? Who would be responsible? Who would be responsible to say this is bad or this is good, or this can be enhanced, or we should not stop, we should not modify these parts?
We are looking for a consensus through the IETF, because this shouldn't be addressed and cannot be addressed by a single vendor, because there are differences on the ground. And when disambiguating some of the points, we would expect and wish for a group of people to actually explain what the differences are, what the problems is, and find a consensus what to put in a protocol.
I can answer the question, basically, which is that this is being offered to the Ops Area Working Group, where the discussion would be held.
Thank you again.
Just to go on this one of the assumptions here is that you would like to have backward compatibility with existing deployment, because you are saying that it is something widely deployed. And the fact that you cannot ensure that what will be done in any working group within IETF will fit with what is already deployed, because if I decide, and if there is a consensus that this update will be good, but it conflicts with existing deployment, we are not even sure that this will be applicable in the field. So based on that and based on other experiences, I would say that for other protocols defined in IETF and other protocol was defined by vendor, having something clarifying in a draft reviewed by IETF and so on, explaining how we should use TACACS today, with maybe some clarification and even some proposed enhancements of the protocol, but without defining a new standard protocol for that would be acceptable. So would mean that having something informational with a wide review from IETF folks will be acceptable, because otherwise I think it would be even counterproductive regarding what you would like to achieve, saying that having something backward compatible compared to what is actually already deployed in the networks. So at least it would be my feedback.
Thank you. I have to say we have same issues, because at the same time we would like to go for the fourth protocol, exactly like we were not accused of, but suggested that what we are trying to do. But at the same time, we would like to get this one to the standard track, because this allows a user or operator or network to actually lean on vendors to comply with the standard as much as possible. And based on what I heard about Radius experience, this is hard enough even with standard tracks protocols, let alone what would happen with informational track.
Yeah.
So we would aim to actually go for the standards as much as possible.
Hold on. Yeah, I don't think we need to explore that area too much yet. I think that is actually a question for the working group. But I think one of the things that I'm going to want to hear from is implementers about this, because obviously if you have to dust off code that you last touched in 2004, that's going to alter your opinion of this a little bit. But I think we're going to also move on from this topic, because this is going to be something that is going to need to go to Ops AWG for more discussion. And you want.
Thank you very much for the time for allowing us to present. Thanks.
right, so I'll be giving an update on the Yang model coordination group. So it will be kind of tough to stay in the pink square and looking at the screen. So sometimes you'll see my back. All right, so first slide. So what is this? This is directorate reporting the Ops AD. By the way, who knows about this directorate? Okay, quite a few people. Okay, very good. So we are actually 4 in there. We're spending 1/3 of our time on Yang modeling, Yang models, coordination and everything. So it started like in February. We have people for 1 year, and the goal is help with development and coordination of the numerous Yang models within the IETF and the promotion of Yang modeling in the industry. All right? So in the next 2 slides, I've got basically a high-level description of what the job is. I won't spend too much time here for 2 reasons. First of all, it was more beneficial for this crowd to discuss TACACS Plus, so I'll squeeze this session. And second of all, I'll be repeating that in NetMod. So NetMod is only about Yang models. I'll go in more details here. This is to address a broader audience. So good. Next slide. So compiling, publishing, maintaining inventory, documenting, discussions, participating, etc. Next slide. And the next one. Now, if we look at this, we could work in phases, right? The first one is to list all the Yang models, and we've got many all over the place. The phase number 2 is, well, tooling. I mean, if we want Yang to be a success, we must have the associated tools, right? Next is we need to help people with the compilation. You'll see the numbers. We still have a lot of Yang models that don't compile well. Then training is the next thing. I'll address that. And education, by the way. Now, there is also the notion of coordination across SDOs and open source. You'll see we'll have plenty of Yang models in open source as well. Then I've been asking what to standardize first in terms of Yang models. You'll see that. And finally, the model coordination within the IETF. So the first one, the list of Yang models. During the hackathon, we generated this figure. By the way, you've got all the URLs at the bottom. So what we see is a growing number of Yang models. 150 right now, right? Up to 250 because there are some that are examples, some that don't extract correctly, etc. So what's interesting is that the green curve is the one that compile without problems, without even warnings. The red one is with warnings, right? So somehow, if we want to be successful, all these should be compiling without errors. Okay, so the new test there with the arrow is whenever I make a distinction between errors and warnings. The Pyang patch is something that we patch during the hackathon to improve the error message. And because we're working on Yang 1.1, there are errors that we should not pay attention to any longer. And the third one, the Yang validator, is an online tool that we put on the web. So I'll cover that as well. Yes. So if I look at numbers, I mentioned between 150 and 250 Yang models in the IETF, right? I'm collecting the Yang models from the MEF. Right now, they've got 2 standards already. They've got 5 existing documents. I don't know how they call that, I think draft or something like that. On the next slide, I'm compiling also the one from IEEE, because you see, I mean, it's not only the IETF, it's many different SDOs. Okay, right now they don't compile, but it doesn't matter to start with, right? It's a stupid UTF-8 error in that situation. It's no big deal. Yeah. Open Daylight, 473 Yang models, right? So do you see why this directorate is very important to make sure that we coordinate across open source and SDOs? If you want to play with your tools, I'm creating the tar file with all the Yang models so that you can import everything directly. Okay, next slide. Tooling. At the last hackathon, we created a tool to extract the Yang models directly from IETF drafts. And we're using that to extract. And okay, second bullet point, we just posted on the web the Yang validator. In there, you can post your draft, and we would extract the Yang model and compile them, right? So you would directly get the error messages from the compilation. We were trying to work on integrating this directly in IDNet during the hackathon. It's work in progress. We're working with Henrik from the tool side. You need to do a couple of things, and we'll need to have the right priority for this. So we're depending on Henrik. During the hackathon, we have a Yang Explorer. That's a GUI in which you could load your Yang models, and that will show you directly the RPC. The RPCs in netconf and resconf. You will find a demo of it during the bits and bytes. Look at the hackathon table. Very interesting if you want to even do testing of network elements. All right. At the hackathon, we also created a way to extract all the groupings, the type def, from all Yang models. The point is that we want to reuse those if possible, right? So they will be made available. We improve PYang. Okay, I'll skip the detail for that. It will be discussed in NetMod. Okay, next slide. And what we produce is every single draft there that has got a Yang model. You will see Yang model, draft, compilation errors. Review your drafts and make sure they do compile, the Yang models compile correctly. Next slide. And by the way, we've got this Yang editing advice session on Sunday at each IETF. It's like free Yang consulting, right? Come with your Yang models, we will give you advice. Okay, next one. Training. We have a training. It will be online in 2 weeks. It's on Yang, it's on netconf. We made a mistake there, is that we call a professional service to make a very nice training, and we've been delayed by 3 months. So I'm hoping it will be perfect. In terms of education, there is like one draft which is on the classification. We have many different types of Yang models: standard, proprietary extension, generated, etc. In this draft, we want to explain all this. It will also help with the discussion with the different SDOs. Right? Next slide. All right, on the second bullet, I'm tracking what's happening in terms of Yang models throughout the industry. Feel free to review that. We're involved with the MEF. We're involved with the IEEE. I have interest from BBF now. They want to have like a Yang doctor for more, 101s. Yeah, next slide. Now, with my AD hat on, I've been asking all the operators that are working the IETF, what Yang models should we be working on first, right? Because we've got a pile of them. And to try to summarize this in one sentence, this is basically all that we need to create an L3 VPN. And by the way, there is an L3 VPN service module working group, right? So, and we know which Yang models these are, like interface, done, right? A VRF, an access list, a QoS, all the routing ones, right? OAM, ideally. Now, the correlation inside the IETF now, this group is involved in a couple of design teams, in a couple of drafts, like access list and QoS, also in the routing coordination. If you were part of the meeting this morning, we spent 2.5 hours on Yang models for routing and how to coordinate all this. So if I have to rate us on the different phases, and by the way, it's part of our charter that we have to give like regular status updates. So I would say the list of Yang models were there. The tooling, it's ongoing, right? You will see more tools as we go. The help is compilation, you see the curve, it's going up. As soon as we'll have the PYang in the ID units, I'm sure to be taken care of. Training, it's almost done. Coordination with different DOs, that's a topic which is top of my mind. We discussed that again yesterday with the IEEE liaison person, Dan Romascanu. So ongoing, getting there. Priorities, it's almost done. If we achieve in, let's say, a year or maximum 2, being able to configure an VPN, that would be great. And the model coordination inside the IETF, I would say it's we should do more. Again, this morning we saw like a couple of tunnel-related Yang model drafts, right? Why do we have so many? We should do it once, right? And I think the last slide is any questions. And by the way, if you're interested to join, but there is a time commitment linked to that. And the mailing list is open, but we have just meetings between us, like WebEx meetings. So any question or answer, please.
I've been Glenn Parsons. I have a question on GitHub. I understand there's a Yang repository in GitHub that a lot of developers are using. Is that part of your phased approach that you mentioned here, or is that separate? Like that would be used before you would come into the IETF sort of?
It's separate. For example, from the IEEE, I take this from public directory. From MEF, from GitHub, it would be great if you would have a single GitHub for all the Yang models in the world. Practically, I'm not sure if it's going to happen. So ideal. For example, we discussed with Dan Romascanu for the IEEE, it would be great if we could have one. But there are some implications about IPR and read the boilerplate and something like that to be worked on.
Right, but from the IETF perspective, you didn't mention
from the
GitHub.
IETF.
You didn't mention GitHub here at all. So that's what I was asking.
There are some in GitHub, but I'm still extracting the one from the draft. So you're asking whether or not we should put all our Yang models in GitHub. If it helps, I don't see any issue there. This is what you want?
I'm just curious. I mean, because it wasn't part of your process, and I know there's a lot of people who are interested in doing that. So I was just wondering if there was an interest.
I don't see any issue with that. If we could have a GitHub with the right boilerplate.
Scott Bradner, a couple of things on that. One is that the IETF Trust has produced a statement that can be put into a GitHub repository that talks to the IETF IPR, and it's a note-well kind of thing. But if GitHub, as it has been quite often being used for, is used as the mechanism to create an internet draft, you waiting until it becomes an internet draft is certainly not a big deal. You don't have to go back to the source and work on it there because it's in process until it gets to be an internet draft. It's different in other standards bodies where they might not have a publicly accessible draft working group document. So in that case, going straight to the source like GitHub would be more useful.
All right, thank you.
Tim. It's incredibly timely that we managed to have this meeting just before this one. Yeah. So that way we actually have an update.
Anyway, I'm Tim Wasinski. I'm one of the co-chairs of DNSOP. Suzanne was supposed to do this, but she had other IAB things to do. And Joel asked me, I think because in the last 6 months we've moved a lot of stuff through the working group, probably for the first time in a while, that, and he's sort of so pleased by that much, he wanted me to come up and sort of speak about it. So we rechartered about a year ago.
Yeah.
And we added 2 different things to the charter. One was to add slight protocol modifications, things, to the charter. So there's a couple drafts in here that talk about that. Nothing that drastically changes DNS. And the other one is to address the special use domain names that are in the RFC 6761 sort of place. And that was something that it seemed like the IESG was responsible for, and they did not want to deal with it. And so they passed it to us. So kind of looking over the past 6 months, some of these are sort of updates. We're doing an update on 5966biz, which is about TCP implementations, which is becoming very interesting along in the deprive group, which is doing a lot of stuff with TLS in terms of privacy and confidentiality. And the TCP Keep Alive draft is very much tied to that as well. It's a lot, we're seeing more people doing TCP type situations where they want to sort of do lots of packets back and forth. The DNS cookies and the QName minimization are both slight protocol modifications. QName minimization is a confidentiality / privacy attempt to drop the fully qualified domain name when you're doing queries all the way to the root. And the cookies one is an attempt to do small DNS cookies between client and server as a way of handling or addressing sort of possible DDoS type situations. So they're very minor. If the client or the server doesn't have it, nobody sort of breaks or anything like that. This is just small tweaks kind of thing. We put a couple other things in here that I don't think we're actually working on. Well, client subnet is definitely is the one that a lot of the CDNs use, and it was very contentious when it was in DNSX. This one is definitely just an attempt to document what the big vendors use, Google, Akamai, et cetera, and I believe they're actually going to go try and then go back and think of better ways of doing that. And yes, there's a lot of privacy concerns about client subnet. However, it does exist out there, and there is a usefulness to document what operationally exists today, as you all well know. Next one. The top one, the DNS terminology draft, it started off with very noble ambitions. It's trying to actually collect all the DNS terms and all the RFCs that exist today, and then try to put it in one place. And what we realized, what the authors realized, is many of the RFCs have incorrect definitions versus what are people using today versus other things. And so it's that their first attempt is to actually just document what exists, and then once we get that through the working group, it's actually gone through working group last call, but there's still things that keep coming up. I think their hope is that within a year they would actually do a biz document that actually tried to fix those specific definitions that are considered contentious. But I think it's a really good document because it puts everything in one place. So like an implementer, if they're trying to understand DNS, here are basically the glossary of all the bits that make things work. And then some of these are sort of definitely around DNSSEC, a lot of DNS security stuff, the key timing draft, and sort of handling rolling keys over. It's gone through a couple different iterations, and actually it's sitting in the editor's queue right now. And the roadblock avoidance, which is something we did during the hackathon over the weekend. We started writing some tools to actually address catching DNSSEC roadblocks. And we have some very interesting tools that are starting to come out from that. So those are kind of cool. So what else was on that back one? Oh yeah, forget the rest of them. Okay, yeah, trust anchors. That one is moving along as well. So we've done a lot of stuff with DNSSEC, a lot of operational stuff, because we've got to start deploying that. But the big stuff that's operating just a pile of quicksand that you should never wish on anyone is the special use domains. The Onion one, this was something that the Tor people came to us and they wanted us to basically adopt .onion. And the real reason they wanted it into the special use registry is because the CAB forum will refuse to issue them certificates after a certain date unless the domain is either in DNS or excluded from being in DNS, which is the whole point of 6761. That's like the .local stuff that Apple uses and stuff like that. But that's kicked off literally a firestorm. And if anybody around the IETF mailing list, you're seeing that as we're going through IETF last call on that. We've had interim meetings on it. We've discussed it in London and in Dallas. I mean, it's just, we discussed it today, and we're actually trying to figure out, we have to, the problem is, it's the wrong way to solve the problem, and so we're trying to actually figure out the right way to sort of answer the right questions there, how to sort of separate DNS from the namespace, because there's a lot of requests coming in for people who basically, I consider sort of maybe gaming the ICANN system and saying we have this thing that's sort of squatting in the root zone, so we should have it excluded at all times. It's just, I don't know any other way to say it, but just a political mess.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. I think one of the things that I wanted to underscore in bringing this into Ops versus Synopsis was that the rate of change that's going on here, even though most of them are relatively small, is pretty high. And so some of these things are things that need to be exposed outside the DNS op community. Some of them are sort of general interest to the entire IETF community, and we don't even have time to discuss in the DNS op working group the overview of the work that's actually going on at this point, rather than getting down into the details. So, this was good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Like the DNS terminology one, I think that one should be almost like a reviewer's kind of thing, where they look at when they're reviewing other documents, sort of thing. So, but we've got a long way to go. Yeah, we've got a lot going on. I think we're going to try to take August off, though. So.
Alexei Melnikov, you had, or actually no.
Yeah. So actually during the Ops Open Hour, please, we had a request on the private enterprise number. You can come to the mic there. On a draft to really sponsor it, and actually it would be a good idea for the Ops AWG to get feedback on this one. So there were no slides prepared because it was short timing, but if you want to say a few words about it, that would be great.
Right. So Pearl and David Conrad from IANA and I were working on a draft to actually properly document what private enterprise numbers are and what the IANA policy is for allocating them. I think between three of us, we're thinking that the document is pretty close to being done. There are very few issues about what characters should be allowed in enterprise names if you allow non-ASCII version stuff, but I think it would be very good from Ops and Management area to review this document and make sure it's correct and examples are good, and that's it really.
Yeah, so this is going to undoubtedly get tossed towards the mailing list.
Scott Bradner, I haven't read the document. How big a document is it? Is there you just go to table of contents. That's
11 pages.
Yeah, scroll back up slightly.
And most of it is, sort of instructions to IANA about what they want. So it's
seems pretty logical to me.
Yeah.
World's fastest review. I don't think we need a hum for adoption or anything. Thank you very much for your effort, and we should take this to the list.
So should we send the email and?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We can follow up with you. Open mic. Anybody want to run up there? How are the ADs doing? Completely insane. You get to replace one of them this year, or or return him, I guess.
As I was mentioning the Ops Directorate lunch, it would be good to have new candidates and new blood. It's always good to have new blood in the Ops area. So feel free if you want. If you have questions on time commitment, what we're doing, and everything, we're always available.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's literally no one more interested in having talented ops and management area chairs than the current ones. Like, because if there's somebody out there who can do a better job than me, that person should probably be in this role. You don't get to do that for another 18 months, but like, you know, we have a really strong interest in not having this go sideways. So we are available to discuss with you whether or not you'd like to do this, like now or in the future, and what the role entails and how much effort it requires. So if that is of interest to you, please let us help you ease your way into IETF management. Thanks. And I think we're good.
Right, good. It definitely is both. So, oh, really? Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a good idea. I'm just over the way. For a week. Right after. Brilliant. Okay. I was there for pizza. It was pretty cool. Beautiful city. We were there. Okay. That's scary.